Okay, so welcome back to our discussion on Unit 5 Revolutions. This is topic 5.9 Society and the Industrial Age. The thematic focus of this lecture is going to be social interactions and organizations. And by the end of this lecture, I'd like you to be able to explain how industrialization caused change in existing social hierarchies and standards of living. Historically, new social classes, including the middle class and the industrial working class, developed. While women, and often children in working class families, typically held wage-earning jobs to supplement their family's income, middle-class women who did not have the same economic demands to satisfy were increasingly limited to roles in the household or roles focused on child development. The rapid urbanization that accompanied global capitalism at times led to a variety of challenges, including pollution, poverty, increased crime, public health crises, housing shortages, and insufficient infrastructure to accommodate urban growth. So let's begin with pre-industrial social structure. On your guided notes, I'd like you to fill in the little pyramid here that is pictured on the left side of the slide with the clergy, nobility, and peasants into your guided notes, and then answer the question, with the rise of the new middle class, what was social status now based on, as I go through this slide with you. Before the Industrial Revolution, European societies were predominantly agrarian, with a social structure characterized by a clear hierarchy. This hierarchy was divided mainly into three estates or orders: the clergy, the first estate; the nobility, the second estate; and the commoners or peasants were the third estate. The nobility owned most of the land and held significant political, economic, and social power, while the clergy also held considerable influence, particularly in education and spiritual matters. The vast majority of the population were peasants who worked the land and lived in rural areas under the control of local landlords. Urban populations existed but were much smaller, consisting of craftsmen, merchants, and professionals who formed a nascent middle class through their influence, though their influence was limited compared to the rural-based estates. The Industrial Revolution, it catalyzed significant economic and social changes, leading to the rise of the bourgeoisie, a new middle class comprised of industrialists, business owners, and professionals. This class emerged as a powerful social force due to their wealth generated from manufacturing, commerce, and finance. The bourgeoisie were instrumental in driving industrial growth, investing in factories, and innovating in production and distribution methods. Unlike the traditional aristocracy, their status was based not on land ownership, but on capital and enterprise. This shift allowed them to challenge the existing social order, pushing for political reforms that would protect and enhance their economic interests. The burgeoning middle class also fostered the development of new social spaces and institutions, such as schools, banks, and civic organizations, which contributed to the transformation of societal values towards those emphasizing hard work, efficiency, and meritocracy. So let's discuss the industrial working class. Parallel to the rise of the bourgeoisie was the creation of the industrial working class, or proletariat, composed of individuals who sold their labor to operate machinery and produce goods in the new factories. This class emerged from the mass migration of former peasants and rural workers who moved to urban centers seeking employment in the burgeoning industries. The industrial working class experienced harsh working conditions, long hours, and low wages, with little to no social protections. The concentration of workers in urban factories also led to the development of class consciousness as workers began to organize themselves into unions and political movements advocating for better working conditions, wages, and rights. The existence of the industrial working class highlighted the stark inequalities of the industrial age, setting the stage for social and political struggles that would define much of the modern era. So the middle class that emerged during the Industrial Revolution was characterized by its distinctive lifestyle, which set it apart from both the aristocracy and the working class. Middle-class families typically lived in well-appointed urban or suburban homes, reflecting their economic stability and social aspirations. This class placed a high emphasis on domestic comfort and the nuclear family, with a clear division of gender roles. Men were the breadwinners, working as professionals or businessmen, while women were often tasked with managing the household or raising children. The middle class also had access to consumer goods that were luxuries for the working class, such as books, musical instruments, and later electrical appliances, which symbolized their status and comfort. The values and aspirations of the middle class were largely centered around respectability, self-improvement, and social mobility. Hard work, thrift, and prudence were prized virtues, seen as the means to achieve personal success and upward social mobility. Education was highly valued, not just as a means to an end, but as an end in itself, fostering a culture that emphasized literacy, cultural refinement, and intellectual achievement. The middle class aspired to distinguish themselves from the working class through their manners, speech, and even leisure activities, embracing practices and hobbies that reflected their status and refined tastes, such as attending the theater, playing the piano, and participating in charitable activities. The ideal of self-made man became a central narrative of middle-class identity, celebrating individuals who rose to prominence and wealth through their ingenuity, hard work, and perseverance. This ethos not only underscored the value placed on entrepreneurship and innovation, but also reinforced the belief in the possibility of social mobility. Stories of successful businessmen who started from humble beginnings and climbed the social ladder were widely admired and emulated, serving as both inspiration and validation of middle-class values and aspirations. So let's talk about the working class versus middle-class women. During the Industrial Revolution, working class women played a crucial role in the burgeoning industrial workforce, taking on jobs in factories and mines under often grueling conditions. They were employed in large numbers in the textile industry, which was among the first to industrialize, as well as in other sectors like pottery and coal mines. Despite their significant contributions, working class women faced lower wages compared to their male counterparts and worked in environments that were hazardous to their health. The necessity for women to work was driven by the economic demands of supporting their families, as a single income was rarely sufficient for survival in the new urban settings. On the other hand, middle-class women experienced the Industrial Revolution very differently. While their working-class sisters toiled in factories, middle-class women's roles were primarily centered around the home and family, embodying the idea of the cult of domesticity. This cultural norm held that women should be pious, they should be pure, submissive, and devoted to family and homemaking. Middle-class women were expected to oversee the domestic sphere, raising children, managing household affairs, and maintaining moral standards. This division reflected broader societal views on gender roles and economic status, where the ability to remain out of the workforce signified a family's middle-class status. And that takes us back to that topic of child labor. As we have previously covered children in the industrial workforce earlier in this unit, we can recap it here. Child labor was a common practice during the Industrial Revolution, with children as young as 5 employed in factories, mines, and mills. Just like adults, they worked long hours, up to 16 hours a day, in unsafe and unhealthy environments. The reason so many children were put to work was because families needed the additional income, and children were seen as cheap sources of labor by factory owners. Children performed a variety of tasks that were often dangerous and exhausting, such as working on machinery, carrying heavy loads, and cleaning and repairing equipment. Once again, pictured here are 4 child miners in Prussia in the late 1800s, which illustrates how children were not spared from even the most dangerous and difficult jobs. So let's turn our attention to environmental impacts of the Industrial Revolution. Using the slide here, I'd like you to turn to your guided notes. You'll see that the first box has been done for you, deforestation and resource exploitation. I'd like you to fill in the other 4 boxes while I go through this slide with you. Deforestation and resource exploitation. The burgeoning demand for raw materials, including timber for construction and fuel, it led to widespread deforestation. Forests were cleared not only for wood, but also to make way for agricultural expansion to feed the growing urban populations and for mining activities to extract minerals and coal. Looking at air pollution and soot, the extensive use of coal in factories and homes released large quantities of smoke and soot into the atmosphere, which led to severe air pollution. Industrial cities became notorious for their smoggy skies, which caused health problems for the inhabitants and contributed to the acidification of rain. Looking at water pollution, the Industrial Revolution also significantly impacted water bodies. Factories often discharged untreated waste and toxic substances directly into rivers and streams, leading to the contamination of drinking water and the destruction of aquatic habitats. Soil contamination, the use of heavy machinery in agriculture, along with the introduction of chemical fertilizer and pesticides, began to alter soil composition and health, often leading to erosion, decreased fertility, and contamination. Looking at urban environmental problems, the rapid growth of cities resulted in overcrowded living conditions, inadequate sanitation, and the proliferation of waste, which posed additional environmental and public health challenges. Pictured here in the bottom right corner is the locomotive factory in Berlin in 1847. So we have a Lutherberg oil painting. This is an oil painting by Philip Jacob Lutherberg from 1801. And this painting is of a place called Coalbrookdale, which is considered to be one of the birthplaces of the Industrial Revolution. So in your guided notes, I'd like you to answer these 2 questions. Number 1, looking at this image, and you can pause the slide to take a really close look. Make sure to examine the background, examine the house, examine the people and what's going on in the front of the picture. What does the image suggest about the environmental impact of coal usage during the Industrial Revolution? And then number 2, how did the use of coal as a primary energy source contribute to the changes in the labor landscape during the Industrial Revolution, as illustrated here in this painting, in this image? And that takes us to urbanization and crime. The anonymity of chaos of burgeoning industrial cities provided fertile ground for crime. The density of the population, coupled with widespread poverty and the absence of effective law enforcement, led to higher crime rates. Petty theft, burglary, and public drunkenness became common as did more serious crimes like assault and murder. The anonymity offered by the urban environment made it easier for criminals to evade capture, and the disparate social conditions often bred a sense of lawlessness. The industrial cities of London, Manchester, and New York, among others, were rife with slums known as rookeries or tenements. These densely populated areas were a maze of narrow alleys and dilapidated housing, often without basic amenities. Such conditions not only undermined public health, but also heightened the incidence of crime as people struggled to survive in the face of poverty and the lack of opportunities. As a response to the growing crime rates, cities began to establish formal police forces, such as London's Metropolitan Police Service, which was founded in 1829 and aimed to provide organized and professional law enforcement. Additionally, the latter half of the 19th century saw various social reform movements that sought to address the root causes of poverty and crime. These movements pushed for housing reforms, improved sanitation, and better working conditions. The establishment of public parks, libraries, and educational programs were also part of the efforts to improve the living conditions and uplift the urban populace. So let's talk about urbanization and housing. You may recall from earlier in this unit the tenement housing that developed as a result of urbanization during the Industrial Revolution. These tenements lacked basic amenities like running water and sewage systems, contributing to public health crises. This housing crisis was not merely a matter of shelter, but was intertwined with the overall quality of life, affecting the physical and mental health of the urban population. One of the most notorious health crises of the 19th century was the outbreak of cholera, a waterborne disease that caused severe diarrhea and dehydration. Cholera epidemics killed thousands in cities like London and Hamburg, revealing the dire need for improved urban sanitation. These outbreaks prompted significant changes in public health policies and the development of modern sewer systems designed to prevent such diseases. In response to the dire living conditions, some cities began to experiment with public housing projects towards the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. These projects were intended to provide affordable and sanitary housing options for the working class. The development of public housing was often part of a broader urban planning effort that included the creation of parks, public baths, and health clinics, aiming to ameliorate the living conditions in the industrial cities. Pictured here on the right is Charles Henry White's The Condemned Tenement from 1906. And with that, we have wrapped up our discussion for topic 5.9. So there are a few things I need you to do. The first is the graphic organizer called Society and the Industrial Age 5.9. I want you to start at the top and answer what two new social classes developed as a result of industrialization. From there, I want you to move down and describe the roles and working conditions for each of those new social classes. Then in the second half of that graphic organizer, explain some of the differences between farm work before industrialization and factory work during industrialization. And that leads to explaining how the Industrial Revolution affected women and children. I want you to consider different social classes in your response here. The second graphic organizer I want you to pay attention to is actually our continuity and change in the industrial age, and this makes up the ideas for 5.10. There is no lecture for 5.10, it's just continuity and change, so you just got to complete this graphic organizer. So I want you to answer the questions below with a good solid paragraph for each. Use relevant details from Unit 5 to support your answer. And as always, I want you to think about the how and the why in your responses. So the first one, using specific examples, I want you to discuss the extent to which industrialization brought change in the 1750 to 1900 time period. Make sure to, like I said, use specific examples and think about the how and the why. The second question, choose one major rebellion or revolution from this period and evaluate its causes and effects. Since you guys are all working on a revolution project independently, this would be a good opportunity to use what you've learned about your specific project to answer this question. The last thing I want you to do is the timeline challenge, Unit 5 Revolutions. I want you to arrange the following events in the correct chronological order on the timeline table. Then I want a brief description of each event in 1 to 2 sentences. So take a look at the different events, put them in, and then 1 to 2 sentences to describe them. So your 5.9 key ideas for review. Social structure shifted from being rooted in land ownership in pre-industrial Europe to being based on capital and enterprise. The new middle class consisted of businessmen and professionals, and middle-class women were typically in charge of domestic duties. The industrial working class consisted of factory and mine workers. All members of a family, including women and children, participated in the workforce, and women were paid lower wages. Industrialization brought negative environmental impacts such as poor air quality, polluted water, and deforestation. With rapid urbanization came higher crime rates and the establishment of new police forces, and poor housing and sanitation conditions persisted in slums. As always, go ahead and take a couple minutes to watch the AP topic review for topic 5.9 from Heimler, and you guys have a great night.